Hatton had asked me about what I would be speaking on today. And inasmuch as these are definitely strange times, I was considering it and considered it and considered it some more, and finally decided on a sermon that I knew that I had, which was a little bit different than some others, and also could touch on some matters that people ask us preachers about and such nowadays. I call it rules and exceptions. Rules and exceptions. I'll get to that in just a moment. I had wondered personally why it was the case that we could not accomplish what some societies, I don't know whether they accomplished it in China or not, they're so closed, but some societies like South Korea have accomplished when it comes to this kind of a thing. That instead of going through a complete shutdown, they're about to reopen schools in South Korea. Well, how do they do that? Well, they do practice what we today over here call social distancing. But when I was talking about how come they can get a handle on this stuff, the virus, and we can't? And I believe it was Brother Hugh Wayne explained to me, probably being in contact with different people from Asian cultures and such, he said, "Brother, those people have a different kind of discipline." I believe you responded to me about that. And I didn't really fully appreciate it at the time, but there's an individual that makes videos, and I watch those videos because of a game that they play. And this individual is from South Korea. Well, they went out, and they went over to South Korea, and that is, they were already in South Korea, but they went out in the public there. They said, "We have to go to the pharmacy and the grocery store." Folks, over there, and I'm making a point about this, over there at the pharmacy, for example, that this person went to, they took their mother with them. There's people lined up to get their designated masks, that are dispensed. They have to pay for them, but they're allowed so many masks to buy at the pharmacy. Well, you can imagine the line for that over there, because everybody over there wears a mask. By the way, this person and everybody else in that line, all of them are wearing masks. They are lined up. They are, from what I can tell, absolutely silent. They're not moving. They're not conversing. They are not interacting. They are there. And as the queue line goes forward, they go forward. Y'all get the idea? You understand how that works? And people wonder, well, Italy went on shutdown. How come it's not worked for them? Folks, in the Western world, we don't behave like that. We don't behave in that monolithic, I'm not trying to be rough on those people. We don't behave in such a slavish fashion. We just don't do it. Now, somebody says, why don't we do it? Different reasons, but one of the reasons almost has to be those countries have been influenced by a way of life which did not teach them personal neighborliness and the concept of love and help, which has been ingrained in Western societies through the teachings of Christianity for generations. They just don't have it. I'm not saying they don't have the desire to live. I'm just saying that their life is more like that. It's more regimented, same for everybody kind of life, and they have more of a herd type mentality. They don't have the rugged individualism and the distinctiveness which causes people in the Western world to be more dominant and more vigorous, but at the same time to also have problems with things like this because of our sociability, because of our nature. I didn't really fully appreciate that because I wondered, well, why can't we whip it like some of them? Well, we're just not like some of them, are we? We're just not like them. And I'm not sure what all the answer is to that. When I think about it, I believe that America is good in the way that we have approached these kind of a thing, these matters, but at the same time, I'm not, of course, able, especially as a gospel preacher, to tell anybody what the answers are, and we just all have to struggle through things the very best we can. What makes us us, though, regardless of whether we are keeping 6 feet apart or whether I don't see you for weeks, what makes us us cannot change. That is the desire to love God and our neighbor. That, my friend, can never change. And you always need to keep that in your heart, no matter where you are or what you are doing, because it will serve you well going forward in days to come. I would like for us this day to look at a few things beginning in Matthew chapter 12. Matthew chapter 12. In Matthew 12, you have the principle of rules and exceptions given to you. And a lot of people do not understand this, and it causes them some heartaches in life. It gives them ethical quandaries that they cannot answer. And Jesus addressed the subject in Matthew chapter 12 with a series of examples, which I will expand on and give you more examples of, and then the lesson will be yours. Matthew 12 begins by saying, "At that time Jesus went on the Sabbath day through the corn. His disciples were hungry and began to pluck the ears of corn and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it," by the way, it says here they were an hungered. You all know the difference, don't you? Every day I get hungry as a general rule. However, some days I'm hungry. Y'all know what I'm saying? Yes, those days, you could really eat those days. In fact, you need to eat bad. It's coming out of the field and feeling faint hunger. That's the kind of thing we're talking about here. They are an hungered, as it says. They hungry, is the way we would say it in the South. When the Pharisees saw it, they said unto him, "Behold, thy disciples do that which is not lawful to do upon the Sabbath day." Well, yeah, but what does Jesus say? "But he said unto them, Have you not read what David did when he was an hungered, and they that were with him? He entered into the house of God and did eat the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, neither for them who were with him, but only for the priests." What were they going to say about David? Were they going to condemn him? Or, verse 5, "Or have you not read in the law how that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? But I say unto you that in this place is one greater than the temple. If you had known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." When they departed hence, he went into their synagogue, it says. "And behold, there was a man which had his hand withered." So this man is in need of healing, folks. "And they asked him, saying, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath days? That they might accuse him. He said unto them, What man be there among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold of it and lift it out? How much then is a man better than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. Then he said to the man, Stretch forth your hand. He stretched it forth, and it was restored whole, like as the other." Did they learn the lesson? Absolutely not. Verse 14 says, "The Pharisees went out, and they held a council against him, how they might destroy him." Sad, isn't it? Very sad. Why did they have that attitude? They did not understand rules and exceptions. They didn't understand how to apply basically what we in the South would call common sense to your ethical questions and your questions of God's will. We understand this in non-religious areas. Why do we not apply it to religion? I want you to ask yourself that. We understand it in non-religious things. Why do you not apply it to religion? My daughter did not have to file taxes for the year 2018. Did she have income in 2018? Yes. Well, somebody says, "Well, I thought everybody had to file taxes that had a job." No. She did not make enough for them to bother about all that withholding stuff. She did not make enough for them to have charged her any taxes. If she had have filed, it would have been a waste of paperwork for the IRS and her. She was not required to file. A guy calls me up, and we were talking on the phone. He said, "I'm not going to get that federal government check." The one they're about to send out, it seems, and put in people's account. I said, "Why?" He said, "I don't file taxes." Well, but fella, you're an older individual. Everybody's supposed to file taxes. He said, "I am drawing a check now, and people in my position for the amount I draw." He said, "We don't have to bother with it. I don't file taxes anymore." Probably hadn't for years. You know what I'm saying? So everybody has to file taxes. They said everybody has to pay their taxes. Well, If the rule applies to you, it doesn't apply to everybody, and everybody knows that. The rule of the Sabbath days. What did God say to do? He said, you don't go to work that day. The Old Testament said, you shall do no servile work. Isn't that an interesting word, what it says? You shall do no servile work. The Jews misunderstood that in Jesus' day. And they said, hey, your disciples can't go around plucking grain. Well, that's servile work. And Jesus is like, you're telling me God wanted people to go hungry on the Sabbath day because it's a Sabbath day? You don't know what the Sabbath day was for. Hey, you can't circumcise that child on the 8th day. That 8th day falls on a Sabbath day. And Jesus said, you do it and your priests do it. Are you telling me that the law of Sabbath doesn't apply to your priests? You know it does. But they have to on the 8th day because that's God's law on circumcision. And you don't let the Sabbath interfere with that. My sheep fell into the ditch. Why, I've got to go get him. Well, it's a Sabbath day, but I've got to go get him. That's an unusual, immediate circumstance, and he will die in there, and I have to go get him. Jesus said, that's right, you do, don't you? The Sabbath law was never intended to address you getting your ox out of the ditch or your sheep out of the pit. Folks, if the Sabbath law was not good, God wouldn't have given it. If the Sabbath law was not absolute, they would not have stoned a man for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, right? Right. But the Sabbath law never covered and was never intended for people to short-circuit their common sense and for them to think that it applied to all these other things. So when Jesus summarized what he was doing, he said, can you do well on the Sabbath? John chapter 7, verses 22 and 23. Can you? Can you do good for somebody? Here's a man that needs healing. Can I heal him on the Sabbath? And when the Pharisees acted like he couldn't, Mark chapter 3 and verse 5 says, Jesus looked round about on them with anger. He was angry at them. Why? Because they had allowed themselves to become so blinded that they thought the Sabbath law applied to somebody even when they should be merciful. It never applied to start with. It never had anything to do with somebody showing mercy to another individual. You'll show mercy to your sheep. You'll show mercy to your ox, but you won't show mercy to your fellow man. And you wonder why Jesus argued with those Jews? They didn't understand rules and exceptions, did they? Not at all. All right, let's take that a little bit further. How does that apply in modern day Christianity? People misunderstand rules and exceptions. 1 Corinthians 7, verses 10 and 11 says to us that the general rule of marriage is that if you experience a divorce, which God, of course, did not want, Malachi chapter 2, but if you experience a divorce, then let them remain single or remarry. In other words, let them get back together or remain unmarried. That's clearly what it says, right? There's your general rule. Now somebody says, well, this fellow or this woman over here, they remarried. Well, why were they able to do that? Because there is an exception. God never intended by saying, let them be reconciled or remain unmarried. That's what he says in 1 Corinthians 7. God never intended that rule to mean you have to live with an adulterer. He never intended that. It never applied to that. So that's why Jesus said in Matthew 19, except that they commit fornication. Then you can put them away and remarry. You see, the Lord explains there are rules and there are exceptions. We all understand that, don't we? We apply it every day of our life. And yet in religion, many times people don't apply it. I knew of a deacon one time that was a veterinarian. He was off visiting some extremely conservative people of either the Amish or Mennonite persuasion. And as he was addressing these people, he was questioning them in their position concerning marriage, divorce, and remarriage, because they were taking an absolute approach whereby they said, well, it's easier just to kick them out. And so he was like, wait a minute, what if their mate was unfaithful to them? And they said, no, it's easier just to kick them out. Now, is that any different than the Jews? I say to you, it's no different. You have to understand the situation in people's life, don't you? And whether the rule applies or not. You have to use the brains that God gave us and use the common sense that God gave us to understand how to apply the rule. It is wrong, we say, for a woman to have an abortion, for a doctor to perform such a thing upon her, right? Everybody, though, says, although in practical terms, this almost never, if ever, happens anymore. But nobody says the doctor has no right to perform such if he is trying to save the life of that mother. Everybody understands that, don't they? They understand that James 2:8 about loving your neighbor as yourself applies to the concept of help even if the other person doesn't intend harm. They understand that that's a situation that, yeah, I guess that could happen conceivably. So you understand the rule of loving life, and you understand the exception of defending yourself in whatever way is necessary. Church attendance, ladies and gentlemen. You knew I'd finally get down to what people are asking about and stuff like that, right? Church attendance. The rule is Hebrews 10, verse 25. We are not to forsake the assembling of ourselves together. What does God say then about this in principle? Let's go back to Matthew 5 again. Matthew 12, sorry. And in Matthew chapter 12, we'll get to Matthew 5 in just a moment. I want us to look at verse 7. If you had known what this means, I will have mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. Somebody has concern for the health of their loved ones. Somebody has concern of a certain kind and very specific concerns for their own health. Are you telling that person that when God said in Hebrews 10:25 that we're to assemble ourselves together, that those will never brush up with each other, that the rule of Hebrews 10:25 never is supposed to be understood as being qualified by other verses? I say to you, I know that's wrong. I know that's wrong. Not only does verse 7 here not qualify it, but also let's go back to Matthew 5 and I'll show you where Jesus specifically qualified worship and said, it depends. That's why the Lord used the word forsake instead of be absent, right? That's why he used the word. People don't understand what the word forsake means. In Matthew chapter 5, the Lord was talking about, do I worship or do I not worship? And he said, there's something that comes first. There's something that comes first. In Matthew 5:23, he said, if you bring your gift to the altar, now that was Old Testament worship style, wasn't it? That's what they were doing. They were going to worship. And you remember that your brother has aught against you. Leave your gift before the altar. Go your way. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Let that sink in with you for just a moment. Obviously, God intended, therefore, to use common sense. The use of the word forsake means obviously he was dealing with it in a restricted sense. And the understanding of I will have mercy and not sacrifice implies that worship was never intended to expand over things that you understand to be necessary to perform for merciful or for reconciliation or perhaps even other actions, okay? He never intended that. He intended you to use common sense, and he intended you to understand your situation. Jesus did not say, don't offer your sacrifice, did he? He didn't say that. He said, you first do this other thing. It takes priority. So therefore, you need to understand that somebody says, preacher, I'm so sorry. I'm beating myself up every single day. I wasn't at church. I didn't ask you if you were at church. I want to know if you were just laying out of church. There is a difference. And if anyone doesn't know the difference, please ask the question. But don't think that God is a God in heaven who always says something and then says, oh no, it's never qualified. It is qualified. Use the direction of God's word and you'll understand the qualifications. Another example, I'm not going to keep on with these, just giving you, this last and I won't go into any depth on. The Good Samaritan rule. You see somebody that is in need, you stop and you help them, don't you? That's exactly what you're supposed to do. Everybody knows that. Is that unqualified? My wife's driving down the road. She says, hey, let's say she calls me up or something on a cell phone. She says, hey, there's a fella that's broke down on the side of the road over here. Well, I should help him. He does need help. However, does it look like he's injured in any way? No, not necessarily. You're a woman by yourself. And here's a man that's broken down by the side of the road. He needs help, doesn't he? But I think there's maybe other ways you could see to his help, and I think maybe he could wait just a little while, don't you? I'm not going to tell her to stop at that time and to look into things. What husband is going to tell his wife to do that? You're not going to tell her to do that, are you? Somebody says, well, you got to be a good Samaritan. He can wait while she finds someone to contact, or for her to contact the highway patrol and tell them near mile marker so-and-so, somebody is broke down by the road. I've done that kind of thing myself before. You see, you understand what I'm talking about here? Everybody needs to do the best they can in these times. But the best you can do is to use the time to dig a little deeper into God's Word, folks. Dig deeper and understand how God wants you to behave with the common sense and the ability to reason that the Lord has blessed man with. All right? I want to give you another common sense thing to close out. Here it is. Now this one's real super easy. Does it make sense for you to take all these precautions? We just got a handful over here, but you're separating yourself. Does it make sense for us to avoid certain places? Does it make sense for us to spend weeks, maybe even it'll turn into months, doing this kind of a thing so that you might preserve your health from the possibility of getting sick? And then turn right around and say, now, preacher, I know I need to obey the gospel. I know I need to get back right with the Lord. And the judgment is not just a possibility, it will happen. But you know, I'm not going to make any provisions. If somebody was trying to cough in my face, I'd at least put a mask on. But when the Lord tells me, I love you, but I'm coming back to judge in righteousness, I'm not going to do anything. What kind of sense does that make? It doesn't, does it? We have got to act on what we know we need to do. Therefore, it doesn't matter in the end what happens to this physical body. If you will listen to what God is telling you, you are ready for anything. You do the best you can for yourself, but always make sure that you are ready to go, my friend. If anybody is listening to this broadcast at some later time, if anybody be gathered here together this morning with us, and you realize, I have made all this provision for my physical health, but I'm not ready for Jesus, then we stand ready to help at the Willette Church of Christ. Won't you please let us know of any need you have and come to the Lord Jesus as we stand and sing.